Hello guys, welcome back to Not Just Makeup from the new Dublin studio. It's Marco here, and today we talk about quick and easy techniques with inks and oils to paint orcs and every kind of grimy alien. One month ago, I published my first video on YouTube about my way of painting Blanchitsu style using oil paints. And it inspired a lot of interest, questions and requests from you guys. So in this detailed step-by-step, we are going to expand those basic concepts about oils. This time working on top of a richer base, painted mostly with inks, another of my favorite tools. But I can assure you the technique is equally simple, super fast and very effective. Okay guys, here I'm ready with my Stormboy. I just added a little goblin here attached to the rocket and a simple desert rocky base. It's super sturdy, as you can see, for gaming, and I'll show you how to do this kind of bases probably next week. In some points the surface is really flat and a bit boring, so I decided to add some three-dimensional rust. There are a couple of techniques you can use to do it, and I like to use PVA and fine sand, but on vehicles, where the scale permit to use this kind of thick materials. But for single models I prefer to use super glue and bicarbonate to have more control and a finer texture. Simply prepare a drop of glue aside and apply it to the model with a toothpick where you want to create your rust. Try to imagine where rust could naturally appear, or like in this case, just fill the empty boring spaces. Try to work in small areas to avoid the super glue to dry too fast, and when you are satisfied with the application, you can sprinkle the area with pure bicarbonate of soda. The reaction with the super glue is super quickly, and you can clean the area with a brush almost immediately after the application. And in a matter of seconds, here there is an interesting texture ready to be painted. There is a lot to do on this one, so let's start priming. Here I'm using my favorite primer, Simple Molotov Black, directly from the bottle. And remember that you can always do the same with a simple brush, just investing a bit more time in the process. Next step, it's really important to use inks at their best. It's zenithal priming with pure titanium white. I use a pure ink for this job because it's finer, more precise and easier to spray than any other kind of white. It has good covering power, even if its natural transparency gives me all the space I need to build a soft transition, so it's really the perfect tool for the job. As you can see here, I've been quite generous with the white compared to the usual zenithal priming you'll see around, but you'll understand why in a second when I'll start working with inks. The first step is to prepare the skin with a layer of yellow, Liquitex Yellow Azo in this case, to give a solid saturated underpaint for my grain. Greens are usually quite transparent, and this helps to keep everything more vibrant and at the same time giving some extra tone to the skin. Second step for the skin is to use Liquitex Ink Magenta, diluted at least 75-80% with Airbrush Thinner, because really this one has an extreme covering power. So I spray aiming from below to create my tones from the shadows. Working with this kind of transparencies, the black and white undercoat provides the sketch for my lights and shadows, so I need only to add interesting tones to the various parts. I move the piece and the airbrush at the same time, with an angle that lets the color to catch the shapes of the model. In this way, the shadows naturally catch the red tones by themselves, totally by themselves, creating without any effort a nice transition. In the last step for the skin, I simply used phthalo green mixed with 50% of thinner to bring everything together. I spray loosely, hitting part of the magenta and the yellow area, creating a natural transition between them, and giving the general idea of green to the whole skin. The three tones will fuse together, working on top of the lights already settled with the underpainting, and they will be again better fused together with the oils and all the work on top. And now I'm going to use the same approach to paint the clothes using turquoise as base and light, in the same way I used yellow in the previous phase, deep violet for the shadows, and transparent burnt umber to bind everything together and give the idea of a shiny leather. I'm also adding these tones, keeping everything in coherence with the general scheme of the skin, warm shadows and cold lights, because all the piece is in the same environment, so every part of the piece of the model is under the same light. Again, I let the shapes of the model to do all the job for me, moving the piece and the airbrush all around and choosing the most efficient angle. All this reasoning can seem a bit exaggerated for a model where the main objective is to go fast and easy, but I can assure you, keeping in mind these little things adds a lot, even on a simple gaming piece. Okay, now it's time for something really simple and relaxing, with pure Vallejo metal color Duraluminium. That's my favorite silver for this kind of approach. I'm going to cover every single piece of metal of the model. A nice heavy coat covering everything in the same way. And now we continue using inks and contrast paints that are the same thing, and this is the only thing I'll say about this topic. I was saying we can continue working with the same general concept that we applied to the skin and the clothes, but just with a brush. Inks, thanks to their transparency, don't cover the work we already did, but thanks to the high pigmentation, they are still able to tint the surface, creating new interesting tones, easy to blend together and with the previous layers. I used Cygor Brown for the dark leather of the hats, Snakebite leather for the light leather of the belts, Guilliman flesh for the fur around the neck, and Vallejo Game Ink, the skin wash, for the base, for the general tone of the base, and the boots. Continuing with the base colors work, I start painting teeth, nails and eyes with standard opaque acrylics. I like to use Molotov paints for this kind of fast works because they can cover everything with a single pass, but they are super fluid, so easy to blend and to handle. I used ochre brown, beige and white to create a simple transition of layers. Like for everything else, I'm not worried about perfect blending, at least in this phase, because oils will do that work for me later. Continuing with the base tones, I used Vallejo Royal Purple and Molotov Magenta for the gums, and Core Red and Mephisto Red for all the tubes and the cable all around. After this brief window of traditional layering, it's time to go back to inks. Here I'm working with pure and undiluted Vallejo skin wash to create a nice natural warm bronze on top of my silver. Following the same concept, I used Contrast Talassar Blue and Plague Bearer Flesh to change the tones of the original shiny silver in something new and adding a lot of interest to the whole block of metal scraps. Okay, here I officially finished the base tones and I'm at the end of the first full hour of work. The original plan was to put decals on the shoulder pads and the sword, but I was having a lot of fun on this piece, so I went for a couple of freehands. Taking away the freehands from the equation, the whole job took me less than 2 hours. But I had to be honest, the first patterns, 2 shoulders and the 2 sides of the sword took me an extra hour. Not a great plan for a video about speed painting, but I really couldn't resist. So, since I went with freehands, I decided to show you 2 different approaches for the same job. So I based one shoulder and one side of the sword with an irregular layer of white and the other side in black. I use different consistency and irregular brushstrokes to create the idea of a layer of paint given by the Ork himself to his own armor. I also avoided to cover the edges where it's natural to find exposed metal and chipped paint. When I have to paint a precise freehand, especially on a small surface like this one, I like to draw my baselines with a soft pencil. You can do the same thing directly with brush and paint, but if you are starting now putting freehands on your models, you can find easier to use this kind of method, especially for precise angles and lines or geometric patterns like this one. But the end always justifies the means in painting, so use whatever you want. Now that I have all my lines, I can just fill the pattern with black paint, using very high dilution to have a nice and easy flow. In this first step, I'm not looking for the perfect coverage, but I need precision to just settle the pattern properly. Later, when all the edges are secured, I can give another covering layer. Freehands are literally drawings on your model, and they have to be faced like a drawing, starting from a sketch and refining. Same thing on the other side, but this time working with almost the same concept with white on top of the irregular chipped black. Finally, here we are with the second main topic of this video, oil paints. You have already seen me use these paints in my first video about Blanchitsu, and there is a link probably somewhere on the video. Here I'll use a similar approach, but starting to add a bit more complexity to the technique, since you had time to practice and you're ready for the next level. For this model I decided to use magenta mixed with black for the skin, in order to put in the recesses a warm tone like the one I used for the shadows. On the metal parts, another big chunk of the model, I'll use burnt umber mixed with black to add the subliminal idea of rust tones, while creating definitions and strikes of dirt and grime. I'll mix also some green for extra tones, just to have it, and I'll use orange for light rust and rust drippings. Here are my pots ready for mixing. You need only a small amount of oil paint, especially to avoid using a lot of white spirit. That's smelly and not really good for your lungs, so try not to mix too much oil paint in a row. I have pure green, orange, black and magenta, and my two main colors, 50% black and magenta and 50% black and burnt umber. The plan here is to work with different consistencies to obtain different results and effects. In the brown mix I'm adding only a bit of white spirit, because I'm looking for a dense covering paste able to stain a lot the surface and to leave a grimy texture in all the recesses. On the other side, I'm diluting my magenta mix for the skin to the point of a very watery and runny wash, because I'm already satisfied with the tones I have on the skin, so I need only to add some definition and to tie all the colors together. The dilution of the other colors is something in between the previous two. A little note here, because a lot of you asked me in the comment about this. I don't use varnish in this step, I'm not hiding anything from you. I just don't feel the need to varnish the piece, because white spirit doesn't interact chemically with water-based paints, so it's completely safe on top of acrylics. Acrylics can fear the physical stress of the rubbing, the cleaning phase, the excess of moisture and the heat from an air dryer, but if you are delicate in this phase, there isn't any risk. But still, if you don't feel safe during the first experiments, you can give a layer of varnish. It's not so important, but I really don't feel the need. Super easy and simple. Now it's time to apply our mixing, starting with the skin. You can already see how the heavily diluted magenta mix it's soft and gentle on the surface, adding details without staining or altering the surface too much. Here I apply the burnt umber mix with really generous brush strokes. The idea is to add to the model in a single pass years of dirt, grime, dust, and then take it away, leaving the idea that it was there. It's something really similar to what is done on movie props to age and give character and history to maybe a brand new object. You can use an air dryer to speed up the drying time. White spirit is extremely volatile, so you don't need to use an high heat to make it evaporate. And it's better also for the acrylic underneath to avoid the high heat. Time for the fun part, cleaning. At this stage you can start cleaning with Q-tips even without white spirit. The paint is still so playable that you can easily move it around or take it away without any effort. Starting the cleaning process without white spirit, you can modulate better and more precisely the quantity of oil painting you are leaving in each area, creating proper light transitions. Remember always to move the brush or the Q-tip perpendicularly to the details to leave some paint in the spots you need. Cleaning into steps in areas like the face and the shoulder pads give me the chance to create another level of lights and shadows. Modulating the covering power of oil paint, I add a lot of complexity to the very simple paint job I had underneath. That already was dependent on the black and white underpainting it had underneath. On metals, my main goal is to define the panel lines, while almost sculpting the oily, grimy, interesting shapes. Basically, I'm doing what in the Blanchizzo video I did on the robe. Remember that you can always go back and forward for hours with this technique, so don't be afraid to add and take off and maybe correct and maybe correct again. Here I'm adding a touch of pure magenta on the gums and around the crazy eye to give a bit more depth to these details. Waiting to come back to the upper part, I can work on the base with my pure orange. Oil paints work basically in the opposite way of acrylics, and light colors have a lot more covering power than the dark tones. So always be careful with light tones and whites in particular, because they are almost impossible to be erased from the model, even with a lot of white spirit. They have also a chalky, dusty finish when used with an eye dilution, so they are perfect for the base, but you have to be careful while using them on the model. This is the result after a couple of minutes under the hairdryer, and since you asked me, this is the amount of Q-tips that I used for the whole process. You can see here on the Space Marine helmet the effect of the orange, really similar to what Pigments do, but with the natural ability to fill lines by capillarity, so it's really useful in some kind of jobs. Using the same color as a light wash, I'm going to hit my spots of rust, leaving the mix to freely follow the shapes of the rocket. This will create almost by itself the effect of dried pools of rusty water. Same thing on the boots and the lower legs to tie everything with the base. Time for the pigments. I wear my faithful light rust as main tone, and I have my pastels to create some extra dark and light shades. They are just soft chalk pastels from the craft store, nothing fancy. Grab the cheapest, don't worry. And rubbing them on a piece of fine sandpaper, you can easily create your own pigments in every kind of mix and shade you could possibly need. And just have fun with this messy application. A wash of white spirit will blend everything together in a single step. In this case, I'm gonna use, for real, some matte varnish to seal the huge amount of pigments I put on the base. One last trick before the end. To create the pupil of his crazy eye, I'll use a toothpick to create a couple of perfect concentric dots. Flatten the point to have an eating surface slightly larger. Dip the point in paint and hit your target. Then dip a new toothpick in lighter color and with the steady end of a sniper, do it again, but smaller. And here is the final result. I really hope you like the process that hasn't been a proper speed painting, even if we are still largely under the 2 hours of work, without counting the freehand, but more a collection of techniques that you can use for your speed painting. The combination of inks and oils is a great tool to explore for any level of paint job, and you can freely use any bits of what you saw on your models. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can always ask me anything down below with a comment, and you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials. So, see you next week, guys!